First stop, Cardiff, in a new campaign by the Foreign Secretary to further explain the relevance of foreign policy to all four corners of the United Kingdom and of the challenges that lay ahead. First of all, the pros and cons of the world of globalisation.
I'm here because we've got a very simple choice as a country, but a very profound choice. And I would describe the choice as follows. It's not a choice about whether or not we want to live in an interconnected world, because we do. And whether you care about economic life or social life or cultural life or security in our country. It's a fact that we live in a world more interconnected than ever before. That's not our choice. But we do have a choice as a country about whether and how we engage with that interconnected world. And the choice becomes stark, I think, when you express it as follows. That globalization has brought immense riches to many parts of the world, including this one. But there are immense problems associated with globalization. Inequalities, insecurities, and unsustainabilities. Environmental unsustainabilities. Now the choice is as follows. Do we address the problems of globalization by trying to retreat from that world or to try to stop the process of globalization? Or do we address those problems through more globalization rather than less? And that is a stark way of putting it, but it has a particular angle, I think, when you think of it in these terms, that we have the globalization of our economy, that's obvious. We have the globalization of culture. We have, in some ways, the globalization of a sense of a global consciousness about what's right and what's wrong. You see that in global movements around the world on human rights or other issues. But we don't yet have what I would call the globalization of responsibility. And we certainly don't have the globalization of political responsibility.
Mr. Miliband said it was important to point out the relevance of foreign policy to people at home.
In other words, a foreign policy that tries to engage with global issues but only involves Whitehall is a foreign policy destined to fail. A foreign policy on climate change that doesn't engage the energies of business and individuals is going to fail. A foreign policy on Iraq or Afghanistan that doesn't try to engage popular consent is going to fail. A foreign policy that tries to address issues of the economic crisis that we face and doesn't engage opinion in its own country is going to fail. And that's why bringing foreign policy home is an important strand of foreign policy for me and for the Foreign Office.
He then turned to today's economic crisis and the future.
Stage two is how do we avoid this happening again? Because the truth is the global economy has moved forward faster than global responsibility. And that's why the agenda that the Prime Minister and now the rest of the European Union have signed up to around transparency of financial markets, around the integrity of the system, whether it addresses conflicts of interest, around the responsibilities of those at all levels in the system, around sound banking practice, and also around the effective coordination between banks but also between supervisors and regulators. That second stage of the recovery plan or stabilization plan is, I think, not just a European issue but a global issue, and that's why the call for a leaders' meeting, a so-called second Bretton Woods to follow the meeting in 1946 that set the scene for post-Second World War growth, is so important. But I think that as soon as I describe national action and international action of that kind, the point we have a choice, either we engage globally or we don't, comes very much to the fore.
The Foreign Secretary then returned to the challenges of foreign policy abroad, such as climate change and terrorism.
And I want to pick out what I see as the three biggest challenges in foreign policy today, whether you're the Foreign Minister of the UK or the Foreign Minister of any other country in the world. They are about terrorism, they are about conflict, which often leads to migration, and they are about climate change, which I think are the three defining foreign policy questions, in addition to the economic, for foreign ministers around the world. And certainly, I would say, 90% of my time as Foreign Secretary is spent on those three questions. Most problems around the world fit into those three dimensions, and if you think about the problems in the Middle East, they embody all of those dimensions, which is why it's so difficult to make progress. And I just want to recognize in each of these areas there are profoundly difficult issues raised for us as a country, but I think in all of them we are far less secure and far worse off if we retreat into ourselves and don't engage internationally, however difficult.
The overall message: global problems require global solutions. The answer is not to turn inwards and reject globalisation.